There is just a special magic about a World Cup. As well as being the pinnacle of any player's career and the single biggest football and arguably sporting competition on earth, it also has a uniqueness due to its brevity and global reach. In the space of a single month, once every 4 years, those who qualify have as few as 3 and as many as 7 games in order to make themselves heroes. Whilst careers at club level are often shaped and defined over decades, World Cup legends can be made in moments. I'm extremely sorry to whoever suggested this video to me recently. I think it was on Instagram, but I've had a lot of messages recently and I can't find yours to give you a shout out. But whoever you are, wherever you are, you know who you are, and cheers. I'm doing your idea. On the topic of Instagram, I have very belatedly set up an Instagram account, so for those of you who use Instagram, feel free to follow me. My username is at HITC Sevens. Anyhow, the concept of today's video is a simple one. I'm putting together a World Cup best 11, but I can only pick one player from each World Cup. The inclusions are based solely on the player's performances at that World Cup, so Lionel Messi, for example, was majestic in 2010 in general, but he wasn't that good at the World Cup, so 2010 Messi wouldn't be picked, even ahead of, say, 2010 World Cup Diego Forlan. Also, clearly I can't just pick players who won the World Cup Golden Ball, otherwise it wouldn't be a very balanced side, and you all know that I like my fictional 11s to also be functional 11s. Since there have been 21 World Cups in total, I'll be naming a starting 11 plus 10 substitutes. So strap in, make yourselves comfortable, and enjoy my views on an all-time World Cup 11 limited to just one player per tournament. Goalkeeper: Oliver Kahn in 2002. From Ricardo Zamora in 1934 to Gianluigi Buffon in 2006, there have been some spectacular goalkeeping performances at the World Cup finals over the years, but I don't think there has ever been a better overall tournament than Oliver Kahn in 2002, who is the only goalkeeper to have ever won the Golden Ball at a World Cup. A man so frightening he haunts Vlad the Impaler's worst nightmares, Oliver Kahn was always someone who you didn't want to get on the wrong side of. Germany didn't have a brilliant team going into the 2002 World Cup. They were beaten 5-1 by England in qualifying for a start, and they needed some inspiration from somewhere if they were to have a really great tournament. Oliver Kahn provided that inspiration with some titanic performances, conceding only once prior to the final against Brazil, where he was twice beaten by his most formidable opponent in terms of that tournament's best player, Ronaldo. Kahn's inclusion means 2002 Ronaldo misses out on this 11, but there have been many great attacking performances in the history of the World Cup, but no goalkeeping performances quite on par with Kahn in South Korea and Japan. Right back: Jose Nastasia in 1930. We take a trip all the way back to the very first World Cup finals 90 years ago at right back, where I cannot overlook the all-round contribution of Uruguay's Captain Fantastic Jose Nastasia. Nicknamed the Great Marshal, Nastasia is one of the finest captains world football has ever seen, and he led Uruguay to Olympic gold twice, as well as glory in the first World Cup. An inspirational figure who was defensively impeccable on home soil in 1930, Nastasia is not only the only right back to have ever won the Golden Ball at a World Cup, he's also the only defender to ever earn that distinction. Centre back: Bobby Moore in 1966. Another legendary World Cup captain, England's finest hour on a football pitch came in 1966, and Bobby Moore was the man who led them to that famous world title. The England team in 1966 was not the best England team ever assembled, nor was it the best team at the finals, but it did have a brilliant spine and some key men in key positions, along with a slice of good fortune, of course. Bobby Moore was the best centre-back on earth at the time, and he showed his class on the biggest of stages. A man who famously kept a cool head at all times, Moore was alert, composed, and as thoughtful in possession as ever when it mattered most, leading England from the back and picking up the silver ball as the second best player at the only finals to have been held in England. Centre-back: Daniel Passarella in 1978. I promise you that I'm not under instruction to only include former captains. It just so happens that the first 4 players I've picked have all captained their national teams at the World Cups in question. Argentina had long been a colossus on the international stage, but prior to 1978, they had never won the World Cup. Much like England in 1966, Argentina didn't have the best team at the finals, but they got the luck of the bounce, and they had a classy and inspirational centre-back at the heart of their success. Argentina's key man was Captain Daniel Passarella, markedly short for a centre-back at just 5'8", but a giant of Argentina's finals on home soil. When it mattered most, in the second group stage, Argentina's defence was ironclad, keeping clean sheets against Poland, Brazil and Peru before beating the Netherlands 3-1 in the final. Left back: Nilton Santos in 1958. It was a tough decision whether or not to pick Nilton Santos in 1958, since there were so many great players at that finals, Garrincha and Pelé being chief among them. I have plenty of options in midfield and forward areas though, and whilst there is no lack of brilliant World Cup left backs, from Jacinto Facchetti in 1974 to Roberto Carlos in 1998, Nilton Santos remains a class apart from all the rest. When Brazil travelled to the 1958 World Cup, most teams still played with fullbacks who were either as defensive, if not more defensive, than their centre-backs or centre-half. At that tournament, Djalma Santos and particularly Nilton Santos rewrote the book on fullback play, playing with freedom and attacking intent to devastating effect. Nilton Santos is the greatest left-back of all time, and his performances at the 1958 World Cup constitutes the finest performance by a fullback at a World Cup of all time, so he stands out, even among a crowded and richly talented field in 58. Holding midfield. Gerson in 1970. As I have said, you all know I like my totally imaginary 11s to be essentially functional and realistic, so there'll be no Wesley Schneiders or Cristiano Ronaldos shoehorned into defensive midfield. There is no need for such measures anyway, since there have been so many incredible midfield performances at the World Cup over the years. The most obvious of which, and as such one of the first names on this team sheet, being the form of Gerson at the 1970 World Cup. Considered to be the brains of a brilliant Brazilian team that some, although not I, consider to be the greatest in the history of the World Cup, Gerson pulled the strings in midfield and did so to perfection. A true deep-line playmaker and a remarkable reader of the game, Gerson passed the ball with pinpoint accuracy, as well as putting in the hard yards on the rare occasions in which Brazil found themselves out of possession. Gerson won the silver ball at the 1970 World Cup, where he was labelled Garrincha's heir apparent, with only Pelé deemed to have put in more impressive performances overall. Holding midfield. Lothar Matthäus in 1990. It was a much trickier shout picking Gerson's midfield partner, where one of a handful of players could have got the nod, and I should point out that Matthäus and Gerson should actually be switched, since Gerson was left-footed and Matthäus right-footed. Anyhow, in the end, I went for Matthäus in no small part due to the fact that he provided the best balance to the team. Perhaps the greatest box-to-box midfielder of all time, Matthäus was a man who could play in attacking midfield, central midfield, or even as a sweeper. It is in the heart of midfield, where he played at Italia 90, that I've got him in this 11. A World Cup legend, Matthäus played more games at the World Cup than any other player with 25 appearances, and his finest tournament was in 1990. In an attack-minded German team, Matthäus scored 4 important goals from central midfield before keeping Diego Maradona quiet as Germany won 1-0 in the final. Maradona called Matthäus his toughest ever opponent, and whilst he won the silver ball at the finals in Italy, it should really have been gold. Right wing. Garrincha in 1962. It simply couldn't be anyone else on the right flank other than Garrincha, who turned from entertainer to executioner at the 1962 World Cup finals in Chile following an injury to Pelé in the group stages. Garrincha was like a matador who tricked and teased opponents into the tackle before dancing past them to the delight of thousands of adoring fans. But when Pelé was hacked down in his prime in 62, the mantle fell on Garrincha to be Brazil's main man. There was never any doubt that he had the talent, and Garrincha proceeded to ensure that Brazil became 2-time world champions. His performance against England in the quarterfinals remains perhaps the finest in the history of the World Cup, and he comfortably won the tournament's golden ball. Fun fact, Garrincha was actually sent off in the 83rd minute of Brazil's semi-final against Chile after scoring 2 goals, but so besotted had the Chileans become with Garrincha that they petitioned for his suspension not to stand and for him to be allowed to play in the final. FIFA obliged, and naturally, Garrincha was the man of the match in the final as Brazil beat Czechoslovakia 3-1. Attacking midfield. Diego Maradona in 1986. I suspect you all knew this was coming, but there are no surprises in attacking midfield. Diego Maradona's performances in the 1986 World Cup are probably rightly regarded as the finest individual performance by a player at a World Cup, and possibly the finest month-long peak of any player in the history of the sport. Maradona was blessed with all the God-given talent in the world, and at the 1986 World Cup in Mexico, he twinned it with a burning desire to win and his irrepressible inner devil. Maradona famously caused controversy against England with 2 of the most famous goals of all time in a single game, handling the ball for his first and scoring a spectacular solo goal for his second. All round, Maradona in 1986 was simply unplayable. He made a decent Argentina team into something truly special, and he is the most obvious Golden Ball winner of all time, and probably the most obvious inclusion in this 11 to boot. Left wing. Johan Cruyff in 1974. It's one of the few unfortunate elements of Johan Cruyff's career that the Dutch great only ever went to one World Cup, but he left no one in any doubt that he was the best player on earth at the 1974 finals in West Germany. Under the guidance of Rinus Michels, and indeed Cruyff himself in many respects, the Dutch took the 1974 World Cup by storm with their fluid and free-flowing total football, with Cruyff typically starting out in mostly central areas, but always drifting out wide. In Garrincha, Maradona and Cruyff, it is no exaggeration to say that this 11 has three of the greatest dribblers of a ball, and indeed footballers in general, of all time, in behind our centre forward. The Netherlands were electric and Cruyff was scintillating, coming alive in the second group stage with a brace against Argentina and a goal against Brazil, before waltzing past half of the West German team only moments into the final before winning a penalty. The Netherlands converted that penalty, but it wouldn't be enough, as they lost 2-1 to the hosts in Cruyff's first and last appearance at a World Cup finals. Centre forward. Ferenc Puskás in 1954. There's no doubt that this was the toughest selection in this entire 11, since there have been so many great centre-forward performances at the World Cup, from Giuseppe Meazza in 1934 all the way up to Diego Forlan in 2010. Sandor Kocsis was actually the top scorer at the 1954 World Cup, scoring a frankly quite silly 11 goals in just 5 games, including 4 in a single game against eventual winners West Germany. A genuine case could be made for his inclusion, but he still only won the silver ball, missing out to his straight partner Ferenc Puskás, who won the golden ball, and he's my choice at centre forward. Puskás was still playing in Hungary at the time, averaging better than a goal a game, and the stunning truth about Puskás in 1954 is that he played most of the tournament through an incredibly painful ankle injury. In Hungary's opener, having already scored as they led 5-1, Puskás was injured in a strong challenge from centre-half Werner Liebrich. He soldiered on to put in an absolute World Cup masterclass as Hungary reached the final, and it's a grave shame we never saw a fully fit Puskás at a World Cup finals. So that is my 11, and some 11 it is too, but I will quickly reel through my 10 substitutes. Again, I haven't just gone for the 10 best players from the tournaments that are as yet unused, I've tried to have a balance of options from in goal to in attack on my bench. As our number 2, we have 2014 World Cup Golden Glove winner Manuel Neuer. He's joined by Brazil's greatest ever centre-back and 1938 World Cup star, Domingos de Gaia. Covering at both centre-back and full-back is 1994 World Cup all-star Paolo Maldini, and completing what you might call our defensive options is attacking centre-half, or what we might call modern-day defensive midfielder, Luis Monti. One of the all-time great World Cup players, Monti is the only man to make the World Cup team of the tournament, representing 2 different national teams, and the only man to have played in World Cup finals for 2 different nations, having been a losing finalist whilst representing Argentina in 1930 and a winning finalist with Italy in 1934. It is the 1934 Monti who makes the substitutes bench in this 11. Moving on to our midfield options, and we have a fine array of talent, including a couple of World Cup Golden Ball winners, namely 2006 Golden Ball winner Zinedine Zidane and 2018 Golden Ball winner Luka Modric, both of whom were losing finalists in those World Cups. They are joined by 2010 World Cup winner Andres Iniesta, who scored the winning goal in that year's final and was superb throughout the tournament, in addition to offering cover in both central and attacking midfield, as well as out wide on the left. Finally, we have Uruguay's remarkable right winger Alcides Gigia, who scored the winning goal in the 1950 World Cup's de facto final. We have 1982 World Cup Golden Boot and Golden Ball winner Paolo Rossi, who is arguably the least talented player in this 11, but was heroic at the 1982 finals in Spain. And last but not least, the remaining World Cup is the 1998 finals in France, where my choice is Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima. It is a genuine topic of discussion which was Ronaldo's best World Cup between 1998 and 2002, since he was a winner and scored in all but one game in 2002, but he was unquestionably the best player on earth in 1998, making everything look easy, and it will forever remain an unknown whether Brazil would have won that World Cup without his health issues prior to the final. That's all from me then. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Smash the like button if so, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to HITC Sevens, turn on notifications, and obviously feel free to follow me on either Twitter or now Instagram, where the username is @HITC Sevens on both platforms.